The fuel gauge had been lying for the past 20 minutes. Captain Sarah Reeves knew this with the cold certainty that comes from flying military aircraft for 12 years. The needle trembled at a quarter tank, but the engine's pitch told a different story, one that would end badly over the vast emptiness of the Pacific. She'd been returning from a reconnaissance mission near the disputed waters east of the Philippines when the first warning light blinked to life, then another. Then the console became a Christmas tree of failures that made no sense. Her F-35 systems were shutting down in a cascade that no malfunction could explain. "Mayday! Mayday! This is Falcon 79er," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the growing spin of the aircraft. "Experiencing complete systems failure, approximately 400 miles northwest of—" Static consumed her words. The radio was dead. The ejection system indicator glowed red. Even her backup systems had gone dark. The ocean rose to meet her, and Sarah pulled the manual ejection lever with both hands, whispering a prayer she hadn't spoken since childhood. The parachute deployed. She watched her aircraft spiral into the water below, taking with it 12 years of training, countless missions, and the career she'd built from nothing. The ocean swallowed the jet without ceremony, leaving only a ring of white foam that disappeared within seconds. She hit the water hard. The impact drove the air from her lungs, and for a moment she struggled against the harness, the parachute trying to drag her under like some enormous jellyfish. Training took over. She freed herself, inflated her survival vest, and floated in the sudden, profound silence of the open ocean. The sun was setting. She had maybe an hour of daylight left. No radio, no flares. They'd been in the storage compartment that had malfunctioned. Just her, a survival vest, and an ocean that stretched to every horizon. That's when she saw it. At first, she thought it was a ship, but as the swells lifted and dropped her, she realized the structure was stationary, a tower rising from the water like an impossible finger pointing at the darkening sky. It was perhaps 2 miles away, though distances on water played tricks on the eye. Sarah began to swim. The tower grew as she approached, and with each stroke it became less like anything she'd ever seen. The structure wasn't metal or concrete. It seemed to be made of something that caught the dying light and held it, glowing with a soft luminescence that intensified as darkness fell. The base was wide, maybe 50 feet across, and it rose at least 200 feet into the air, tapering to a point that seemed to pierce the first stars. No lighthouse she'd ever heard of looked like this, and lighthouses didn't appear in the middle of the Pacific, miles from any shipping lane or landmass. Her arms burned, her legs had gone numb, but the tower pulled her forward with the promise of survival, of solid ground, of answers to questions she was too exhausted to form. A platform extended from the base, just above the waterline. Sarah dragged herself onto it, coughing seawater, her flight suit heavy and cold. The surface beneath her wasn't metal or stone. It felt almost warm, and it hummed, a vibration so low she felt it in her bones rather than heard it. A door irised open in the tower wall. Light spilled out, and with it came a voice. "Please come inside quickly. We don't have much time." Sarah looked up to see a woman standing in the doorway. She was maybe 40, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing what looked like a lab coat over casual clothes. Behind her, Sarah could see other figures moving in what appeared to be a large, circular room filled with equipment that glowed with the same soft light as the tower exterior. "Who are you?" Sarah managed, her voice raw from salt water. "Dr. Elena Vasquez," the woman said, extending a hand to help Sarah to her feet. "And before you ask where you are or what this place is, I need you to understand something crucial." Elena's eyes were intense, urgent. "We're from your future, specifically from 23 years in your future, and everything depends on you listening very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." Sarah wanted to laugh. Exhaustion, hypothermia, maybe a concussion from the ejection. Any of these could explain hallucinations. But the hand gripping hers was solid and warm. The floor beneath her feet was real. And the equipment inside the tower, nothing on Earth in 2024 looked like that.
23 years? Sarah repeated slowly. Yes, the year 2047. Elena guided her inside, the door sealed behind them with a whisper of displaced air. We built this facility as a last resort, a temporal anchor point that exists outside the normal flow of time. And you, Captain Reeves, just became the first person from the past to find us, which means the timeline is already changing. The circular room was larger than it should have been. The laws of physics seemed to be negotiable here. 7 people worked at various stations, their faces drawn with fatigue and something else. Fear, Sarah realized. These people were terrified.
A man looked up from a console covered in equations that seemed to shift and flow like living things. He was young, maybe 30, with dark circles under his eyes. "Elena, the probability matrices are cascading again. We have maybe 6 hours before the next reset." "I know, Marcus." Elena turned back to Sarah. "Sit, please, and I'll explain why your plane crashed, why we're here, and why the fate of billions of people might rest on what happens in this room tonight." Sarah sat on a bench that formed itself from the wall. She was too tired and too curious to do anything else. "On March 15th, 2047, Elena began, the Third World War began. It lasted 16 hours. Nuclear weapons, biological agents, AI-controlled drone swarms. Humanity threw everything at itself in one final, spectacular act of suicide. By the time the sun rose on March 16th, 90% of Earth's population was dead or dying. The survivors—" She paused, her voice catching. "We had maybe a year before complete ecological collapse would finish what the war started." Marcus continued the story, his voice flat with exhausted repetition. 8 of us were at a quantum research facility in New Zealand, far enough from the initial strikes to survive. We had a prototype device, something we'd been developing for communications applications, quantum entanglement across time. The math said it was impossible, but desperation makes for excellent motivation. "We built this tower," a woman with an Indian accent said from another station. Sarah would later learn her name was Dr. Priya Sharma. "Using technology we barely understood, powered by quantum reactions we still can't fully explain. It exists in all times simultaneously, anchored to this specific point in space, but fluid in the temporal dimension." Sarah's head spun. "You're saying this is a time machine?" "Not quite," Elena said. "We can't travel through time, but we can send information backwards, signals, data, warnings. We've been trying to prevent the war. We send messages to key moments in history, political summits, weapons development programs, peace negotiations, trying to nudge the timeline away from that terrible March day." "And?" asked Sarah, though the haunted look in their eyes already told her the answer. "It never works," Marcus said bitterly. "We change something, the timeline shifts, and then," he gestured around the room, "we reset. We're reborn in this new timeline with memories of the old one. Every time we succeed in preventing one cause of the war, another takes its place. We've lived through this cycle 47 times now." Sarah stood abruptly. "That's insane! You're telling me you've lived through the end of the world 47 times?" 48 after tonight's reset, Priya said quietly. "We think the tower itself keeps us conscious through the changes. It exists outside normal causality, so we're protected from the timeline alterations we create. It's a prison of our own making." Elena moved to a large display that showed something Sarah couldn't quite comprehend, branching lines of probability, collapsing and reforming in patterns that hurt to look at. "Each time we change the past, reality reconfigures itself. We remember the old timeline, but we also remember the new one. Contradictory memories, conflicting histories, all existing simultaneously in our minds. After the 20th cycle, 2 of our team took their own lives rather than continue. After the 30th, another walked into the ocean and didn't come back. We're down to 7 now, and we're all starting to fracture. Human minds weren't meant to carry dozens of contradictory histories."
Sarah moved to the display, studying the incomprehensible patterns. "Why am I here? What does my plane crash have to do with any of this?" "We don't know," Elena admitted. "You shouldn't be here. This location was chosen specifically because it's empty ocean in every timeline we've experienced. No ships pass nearby, no aircraft. The statistical probability of someone surviving a crash and finding this exact spot is astronomical. Unless what?"
Elena and Marcus exchanged glances. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Unless this facility isn't really ours. We've suspected for a while now that we didn't actually build this tower. The math that made it possible appeared in my research notes one morning. Equations I don't remember writing in a handwriting that's almost, but not quite, mine. The materials we needed were delivered to our facility by a supply company that doesn't exist and never did. It's as if something wanted us to build this place," Priya finished. "Something that exists outside our timeline entirely. Something that's been watching us try and fail over and over again." A chill ran down Sarah's spine that had nothing to do with her wet flight suit. Aliens? Or future humans? Or beings from another dimension? We don't know. Elena pulled up another display, this one showing a three-dimensional model of the tower. But here's what we discovered in Cycle 43. The tower has a secondary function we didn't design. Hidden in the quantum matrices is a kind of observer mechanism. Something has been watching human history, studying us, and this structure is both a gift and a test. Sarah stared at the model. A test of what? That whether humanity deserves to survive, Marcus said bluntly. That's our theory anyway. We've been given the tools to save ourselves, to warn our past and prevent the war, but we keep failing. Every change we make just leads to a different path to the same destination. At some point, whatever created this place is going to decide we've failed the test. An alarm chimed softly. Priya checked her console. 4 hours to reset. The temporal matrices are becoming unstable. Elena turned to Sarah with sudden intensity. That's why your arrival might be significant. You're from outside the loop. You don't carry the weight of 47 failed timelines. Maybe that's what's been missing, an external perspective, someone who can see what we've become too blind to notice. "I'm a pilot, not a physicist," Sarah protested. "I don't understand any of this." "Maybe that's the point," Elena said. "We've been approaching this as a technical problem. Change this date, alter that decision, prevent this weapon from being developed. But humanity doesn't stumble into extinction through bad luck or poor engineering. We do it because of who we are, what we value, how we treat each other." Marcus pulled up a new display showing a timeline, the original history from 2024 to 2047. Sarah saw the markers: escalating tensions in Eastern Europe, climate refugees creating instability, resource wars in Africa and Asia, the emergence of AI weapons systems, the breakdown of international cooperation. "Every path leads to the same place," Marcus said. "Different triggers, different specific events, but the same underlying pattern. Humanity fragments instead of uniting. We choose fear over trust, borders over cooperation, short-term gain over long-term survival. The war is just a symptom. The disease runs much deeper." Sarah studied the timeline, seeing the pattern he described. Then something caught her eye. "Wait, go back. That marker there, what's that?" Marcus highlighted it. "Antarctic Treaty Crisis of 2031. In most timelines, this is where international cooperation finally breaks down completely. The treaty collapses, nations scramble for resources, and it sets off a chain reaction that leads eventually to the war. But in this timeline," Sarah leaned closer, "your timeline, I mean, before you started changing things." Elena pulled up the data. "In our original history, the treaty held, barely. There was a single vote at the UN that kept it alive, a representative from a small Pacific island nation who gave a speech that changed enough minds to preserve cooperation. But in 30 of our revised timelines, different circumstances meant that representative wasn't at the vote. The treaty fell and, well... So bring them back," Sarah said. "Don't change the big things. Change the small things that allow the big things to happen naturally."
Priya shook her head. "We tried that approach in cycles 18 through 25. The problem is complexity. Change one small thing and you create ripples that affect thousands of other small things. It's chaos theory in action. We can't predict or control all the variables." Sarah paced the room, thinking. Outside the tower, night had fully fallen. Through the translucent walls, she could see stars, more stars than should be visible through Earth's atmosphere. It was as if the tower reached into space itself.
"You're looking at this wrong," Sarah said finally. "You're trying to change humanity's path by altering specific events, but what if the events don't matter? What if the test isn't about preventing the war, but about proving that humanity can choose differently when given the chance?" "I don't follow," Marcus said. Sarah gestured at the tower around them. "You said something is watching us, testing us. 47 times you've tried to change the past, and 47 times you've failed. Maybe that's because you're still thinking like the humanity that destroys itself, trying to control, to fix, to force a different outcome." Elena's eyes widened. "You're suggesting we stop trying to change the timeline." "I'm suggesting you change the message," Sarah said. "You've been sending warnings, tactical information, strategic alterations. What if instead you sent something simpler? Something that doesn't try to control the future, but invites people to choose it for themselves." "Like what?" Priya asked. Sarah thought of her own life, the choices that had brought her to the military, the assumptions she'd made about service and duty and what it meant to protect people. "Hope," she said. "Not instructions, not warnings, just evidence that humanity can survive, that cooperation is possible, that the future doesn't have to be war and extinction. Let people see what they could be instead of what they should avoid." Marcus was already typing, pulling up new equations. A broadcast instead of a targeted intervention, quantum entangled information scattered across the timeline, available to anyone who knows how to look for it, not changing specific events, but changing the collective consciousness, the shared story humanity tells itself about its future. "It's never been done," Priya said, but her fingers were flying across her own console. "The power requirements alone." "We have maybe 2 hours before reset," Elena said. "If we're going to try this, it has to be now. And Sarah," she turned to face the pilot, "if this works, we won't remember. The timeline will reset, and we'll be reborn into whatever new history we create. But you're not tied to this place. The change might erase you, or send you back to your own time, or I might cease to exist entirely," Sarah finished. She understood. If they changed the timeline significantly enough, the circumstances that led to her plane crash might never occur. She might never find the tower. This conversation might never happen. "Why did you really crash?" Marcus asked suddenly. "All your systems failed simultaneously in a way that makes no engineering sense. What if you were meant to be here? What if whatever built this place needed an outside perspective at exactly this moment in exactly this cycle?" Sarah met his gaze. "Then I'd say I'm exactly where I need to be." The next 90 minutes were a blur of activity that Sarah only partially understood. The 7 scientists worked with desperate efficiency, reprogramming the tower's quantum matrices to broadcast rather than target, to inspire rather than instruct. They loaded the transmission with everything they'd learned, the cycles of cooperation that had almost worked, the moments of unity that had shown what humanity could be, the proof that even in the darkest timeline they'd experienced, people had still chosen sacrifice and love and hope. "It's ready," Elena announced. Her hands shook as she prepared to activate the sequence. "Once we start, there's no stopping it. The broadcast will ripple backwards through time, touching every moment from the tower's creation to the present. It will be subtle, a feeling more than information, possibility more than fact, but it will be there, available to anyone who chooses to see it." "Do it," Sarah said. Elena's finger hovered over the activation control.
In every previous cycle, we thought we knew what needed to change. We were so certain we understood the problem. But maybe the real test was learning to let go, to trust humanity to find its own way, rather than forcing our vision of salvation onto them. She pressed the control. The tower sang. There was no other word for it, a sound that was felt rather than heard, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the fabric of reality itself. The walls became transparent, and Sarah saw everything. Timelines branching and merging, histories unfolding like flowers, moments of choice illuminated like stars in an infinite darkness. She saw the Antarctic vote, but different now, the representative giving their speech with new conviction, as if inspired by something they couldn't quite name. She saw peace negotiations succeeding where they had failed, not because of leaked intelligence or strategic warnings, but because the negotiators suddenly felt certain that peace was possible, that humanity's story didn't have to end in fire.
She saw Marcus, younger, writing equations in a notebook, but pausing now, sensing something in the quantum mathematics that spoke of hope rather than annihilation. She saw Elena, still a graduate student, choosing to focus her research on cooperation rather than competition, guided by an intuition she couldn't explain. She saw a million small choices, each one slightly different, each one pulling humanity toward a future that didn't end on March 15th, 2047. The tower's light grew blinding. Sarah felt herself coming apart, her existence unraveling as the timeline shifted beneath her. She thought of her family, her career, all the specific circumstances that had made her who she was. All of it might be erased now, rewritten by this new history. But she smiled anyway, because she saw in that final moment before the light consumed her the world they were creating. Not perfect, humanity would never be perfect, but alive, struggling, growing, choosing cooperation more often than conflict, unity more often than division. A future where the tower never needed to exist, where the war never happened, where billions of people lived and loved and built something better. The light reached its peak. And then Elena Vasquez jolted awake at her desk, a coffee cup cold in her hand. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the quantum research lab at MIT. She'd fallen asleep over her calculations again, dreaming of what? The dream faded as she tried to grasp it. Something about a tower, about choices and timelines, and it was gone. She rubbed her eyes and looked at her research notes. She'd been working on quantum entanglement applications for communication systems. The math was promising, but there was something else nagging at her, a feeling that this technology could be used for something more important than just faster data transmission. Something about cooperation, about connecting people across impossible distances, about proving that isolation and conflict weren't the only options. Where had that thought come from? Elena stood, walking to the window. Outside, students crossed the campus, heading to classes in a world that felt different somehow, lighter, more hopeful. She couldn't explain why, but she felt certain, absolutely certain that humanity's future was bright, that whatever challenges lay ahead, people would find a way to work together, to choose unity over division. It was an irrational feeling. There was no logical basis for such certainty, but it felt true nonetheless. Across the world, millions of people paused in their daily lives, touched by the same inexplicable sense of possibility. A politician changed their speech at the last moment, emphasizing cooperation instead of confrontation. A scientist pursued a research avenue they'd been about to abandon. A teenager chose to organize a climate action group instead of giving in to despair. Small choices, subtle shifts, the butterfly effect in action, but guided now by something that whispered in the quantum foam of reality itself. You can do better. You will do better. The future is not fixed. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, exactly where the tower had stood and now no longer did, The water was calm under a clear sky. No structure broke the surface. No impossible lighthouse marked the spot. But if anyone had been there with the right instruments, they might have detected a faint quantum signature, an echo of something that once existed, or perhaps might exist, or possibly existed in a probability that collapsed, but left its mark on space-time like a fingerprint on glass. And if they'd somehow been able to decode that signature, they would have found a simple message repeating endlessly in the quantum static. We were tested. We chose hope. Remember this if darkness comes again. But no one was there to receive the message. No one would ever know about the 7 scientists and the tower and the pilot who'd sacrificed everything to give humanity a different ending. Which is exactly as it should be. Because the greatest victories are the ones that erase the need for heroes, the battles won by making certain they never need to be fought. Sarah Reeves sat in the briefing room at Andersen Air Force Base in Guam, listening to her flight assignment for the next day. A routine patrol over international waters. She'd flown the same route dozens of times. But today, for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt different, lighter, as if some great weight had been lifted from her shoulders without her ever knowing it had been there. She thought of the ocean stretching vast and empty below her flight path, and for just a moment she could have sworn she remembered something. A tower, a room full of desperate scientists, a choice to let go of certainty in favor of hope. But the memory, if it had ever been real, slipped away like water through her fingers. Sarah smiled anyway. Somewhere in the space between quantum possibilities and collapsed probabilities, in the infinite branches of the multiverse where every choice creates a new timeline, a version of her understood what had happened. A version of her knew that she'd saved the world not by changing it, but by trusting it to save itself. But in this timeline, in this probability, in this version of reality where the war never came and humanity chose a different path, in this world, Captain Sarah Reeves was just a pilot with a routine mission, living in a future that had been earned through sacrifice she would never remember. And that was the most beautiful thing of all. The quantum lighthouse stood guard over a disaster that never happened, in a timeline that no longer existed, maintaining its vigil across probabilities that collapsed into something better. The test had been passed. Humanity had proven itself worthy, and no one would ever know how close they came to failing.